Are you passionate about foreign policy, national security, and the latest in domestic politics? Consider becoming a member of the DSR Network, your go-to source for in-depth analysis and insightful discussions. With the DSR Network podcasts, stay ahead of the curve on global affairs. Each episode features top experts, policymakers, and thought leaders who break down complex issues into digestible, engaging conversations. From breaking news to historical context, we cover the topics that matter most. Whether it's the intricacies of international diplomacy, the latest in national security strategies, or the dynamics of U.S. politics, the DSR Network has you covered. Members receive an ad-free listening experience, bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, enhanced show notes for select podcasts, and much more. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code GRADUATE to receive 30% off the regular membership price for the first year or first month. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code GRADUATE. Thank you very much for your support.
This week's episode of From the Archive originally aired on June 22nd, 2023. We hope you enjoy.
Nine, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio, coming to you direct from our super secret studio in the third sub-basement of the Ministry of Snark in Washington, D.C., and from other undisclosed locations across America and around the world. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm David Rothkopf, your host, coming to you from Washington, D.C., and we are very pleased to have a friend of ours with us today, Mary Trump, who you know as an author of best-selling books, a host of great podcasts, and now, as I understand it, and I'll get to this in a minute, part-time romance novelist. I don't really quite understand that, but I'm very open-minded. Hi, Mary. How are you?
Hey, David, it's really good to see you in your new digs.
New digs. Well, it's just, my wife's working in Washington, so I will too for a while. So let's get to this thing. You guys are writing a romance novel? We can get to serious politics in a second, but what's that about?
Yeah, let's get this out of the way first,
Yeah, right.
shall we? Honestly, the really short version is that a bunch of us became friends via Zoom during COVID, and somebody came up with this idea of writing a Hallmark movie together because they're particularly fond of Hallmark movies. And it was just a way for us to sort of be creative and get through the second, third, and fourth lockdowns. And I was like, I've never seen a Hallmark movie and I never want to, but I'm happy to write one. And it ended up not working out. And then I thought I was having serious writer's block. I thought, let's write a romance novel instead, and we'll serialize it on Substack. And I've never read a romance novel either, but I've been writing fiction since I was 12. So it's totally in my wheelhouse. And to be fair, I'm not entirely sure it can be categorized as a romance novel, although there's romantic stuff in it. But it's me, E. Jean Carroll, Jen Taub, and it's just really fun, honestly. It's a break from the stuff you and I have to deal with 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Well, you guys are all very smart and you're all talented writers and you're also, funny. So, I mean, is there any humor in this at all? I mean,
Yeah. It's fun. It's in Tuscany. How bad can that be? There's a cow. There's food. There's knitting. There's intrigue, mystery, and a little romance. So we sort of hitting all the high notes, and because I've never read a romance novel, I'm constantly driving E. Jean Carroll crazy because I'm breaking the conventions because I don't know what they are. So that's fun too.
Yeah, well, this is the first one I've heard of that has knitting as a component, but there are knitting. My wife is a knitting fan. There are people out there who are knitting fans.
It's a thing.
It's a thing.
Very serious.
Very serious. Very serious thing. But well, that sounds like an interesting way to occupy yourselves, and certainly all three of you have been closely involved one way or another with the events of America's unending trauma. But you have been quite an illuminating commentator on uh, uh, the mental outlook of your uh, relative. And I'm just wondering what you think that may be now. I've been looking at a bunch of tweets this morning, and I would say, based on what I saw, and you're a trained psychologist, I'm not, but that he's losing it. But then again, I would also say he never had it. So, what do you think?
Well, David, I think you and I and many other people would have made the same assessment at times 2 years ago, 4 years ago, what have you. I think the misogyny and the racism and the anti-immigrant hatred, et cetera, has always been there. But we've increasingly seen this inability to have any kind of impulse control. And obviously, he's never been able to tell the truth. But I don't know. I think it's very difficult to say he's worse because we've seen many early morning all caps tweets throughout the years. And the other reason it's difficult is because even though we know this is a man with serious psychological disorders, and we know that we can make the assumption that they're untreated, that therefore they're getting worse, just as any illness gets worse over time if left untreated. However, is he decompensating? That's the part that's hard to say, because this is a man who's lived his entire life institutionalized. He's never had to live in the real world. He's never had to do anything for himself. He's never had to worry about money or pick out his clothes or anything, make his own meals or clean his own house. So he's protected by that circumstance as well. So it all sort of, that institutionalization sort of serves as a prophylactic against the worse for him. And there's also, he has the benefit of not really being able to grapple with the seriousness of the trouble he's in, because he's never had to before. Like, this is literally the first time in almost 8 decades that the man has been facing any real consequences. And what are those consequences? Yes, he's gotten indicted, but he left a free man. He still has his passport and all that other stuff. So he's still allowed to do the same things he's been doing, despite the fact that you, I, or anybody else would be in prison right now.
Yeah, well, there's that. I mean, you kind of sent me off in a tangent there a moment ago when you said he's never had to worry about money, because I was thinking, if I never had to worry about money, I don't know what I would do with my time. That's really what I think about most at the time. But
yeah, it's true for most people.
Right. Yeah, you just think, how am I getting on? But it seems to me, and you and I talked about this many moons ago, but it seems to me that the walls are closing in, and that like yesterday, he received, or his lawyers received, and I assume he has seen, the first batch of discovery items from the federal prosecutor in the Mar-a-Lago case. He now knows who's going to testify against him. He knows, what they have recordings of. He sees that the case is a strong one, presumably. I think it's interesting to speculate whether the penny has dropped, that he's in deep shit, or It's about to drop. But the kind of person you just described is completely ill prepared for that moment. How do they handle it?
He's not handling it. When you are somebody who has the kinds of grievances he has, and is so privileged at the same time, when you have this ability, and he does have this ability, to find sycophants to surround yourself with, to find people who will always tell you what you want to hear, not what you need to hear, it becomes very easy to tune everything else out. Anything that contradicts his idea of who he is in the world or how his life should be. Now, I'm not saying things don't seep through, because as you just mentioned, the walls are closing in on every conceivable side. There are no gaps here at all. There's no tiny space for him to escape through. So I think what serves him in the short term, though, is his, again, inability to comprehend that he could be in any kind of trouble that could wind him up in prison, for example. But the idea, which would strike fear in anybody, right? He can't feel fear. He can't allow himself to feel fear. He can't allow himself to feel humiliation. So he has to cover all of that stuff over with rage. And I think that's what we see with all caps. And when you come across as angry, it makes a lot of people feel like you're fighting, right? You're being combative and you're standing up for yourself. But this continues to be a frightened little boy whose greatest fear is, again, to be humiliated. And I don't know about you, I've never been indicted myself, but to be hauled in front of a judge and be entirely at the court's mercy must be a very humiliating experience. So he's overcompensating, but it's only going to last for so long because, as you say, one, he now knows who in his mind has betrayed him. So that list just got longer. He knows George is coming. He knows Tish James is coming. He knows that there may be January 6 charges. He knows that there may be more documents related charges brought in New Jersey, which would be a much worse venue for him. So I think I think it's safe to say that it's going to get harder and harder and harder for him to play it off. There are only so many times holding a rally is going to help you change the subject in your own head.
Yeah. Well, he's also going to spend a lot of his time in court. I mean, you've got a New York case, you've got this federal case, you're likely to have a Georgia case, you're likely to have another federal case. You might have two more federal cases. As you said, there was a Guardian report that's, focused on the fact that the feds are increasingly or have a sense that documents made their way to Bedminster, which is kind of a interesting challenge. We don't know what all these cases will trigger because, first of all, he's likely to do something crazy and get held in contempt or something like that. Michigan, other states might bring electoral fraud cases. There's still Tish James out there. Seems like he hardly has time to do anything but court cases.
Yeah, well, that is a really important point. He didn't have to show up for the civil trial. He does not have a choice in these much more serious trials that he's going to be facing, actually and potentially. Although, Judge Eileen Cannon is a bit of a wild card, so we'll have to see what happens with that. But yeah, he's going to be very busy being a defendant, being deposed, and doing his level best to pretend none of it's happening or that none of it's serious or what have you. I wish him luck with that, by which I mean I wish him no luck at all.
How do you think, you have already described that you're writing a romance novel with E. Jean Carroll, and so she's a friend. And I'm not asking you to represent yourself as an unbiased observer. But how do you think that trial was likely felt by him?
He didn't. There's a reason he didn't show up, and it's because he's a coward. He does not like being faced down by women who are much stronger than he is, and he also, it's hard to say. I think it's hard to say because that's the kind of case, and this is a massive indictment against a significant minority of Americans that will increase his street cred with people, or should we say, his being found liable will increase his street cred. His refusing to show up and showing contempt, not just for his accuser, but for the entire process, will increase his street cred with people. On the other hand, he doesn't like to lose, which is weird. You'd think he'd be used to it by now. And he certainly doesn't like to have to hand over money. The problem we run up against time and time again is that he doesn't have to yet. And he's not even paying his own legal bill. So I don't know that he feels the sting of that either. And he's probably moved on from it because these other things are happening. But unless and until there's a mechanism, and we're going to see how this plays out in Carroll v. Trump too, unless there's a mechanism to get him to stop defaming E. Jean Carroll, or to get him to stop incriminating himself, it's just going to get worse. So it is amazing to me that there's literally nobody on the planet either able or willing to get him to stop. I now refer to Donald Trump as E. Jean Carroll's personal ATM.
Well, of course, he probably thinks if I stall for 7 years, I won't even be here. And, my son will have to pay it.
Right.
But, just listening to it, it does strike me that the psychological profile of this guy is different from ours in myriad ways, which you have discussed in the past, we all know about. But one of them is, I think I read this week that he's had 3,000 lawsuits in his life. He's always got multiple lawsuits. He views being involved in lawsuits the way some of us view having breakfast. It's just part of life. And he has not been held to account. And when he is, he uses it to his advantage. Oh, I owe you money? Well, I'll pay you in 7 years after all the lawsuits if you don't bankrupt yourself, which is how the rich, by the way, use the legal system. They view their bad behavior as a cost of doing business. If he, has to pay E. Jean Carroll a few $1 million someday, but standing up and saying nasty things about her helps him with his base. It's the price of a commercial.
Yeah, and you're right. Lawsuits have for him always been a business tactic, because he needs that because he's terrible at business. So delay, waiting the other person out, impoverishing the other person so they can't continue. It's what he does. It's not a surprise that he would continue to try to do that with criminal cases. It's because it's always worked for him before, and he's always gotten away with everything. It is much more importantly, though, an indictment of the entire system, which seems always to benefit the wrongdoer, at least insofar as that wrongdoer is a very rich white man in America.
Let me ask you another psychologically related question. The Republican Party just can't seem to quit him. Many members of his cabinet have said this is wrong, but just as many members almost have said, I'll vote for him if he's the candidate. McCarthy, and the nut job wing of the party in the House, they're out there defending him at every turn, including, when he's like, stealing nuclear secrets, the kind of thing that basically once upon a time you'd get 99.9% of the country to say that's bad, right? It seems like kind of mass psychological pathology. Now maybe it's just self-interest. He's seen as powerful. They're going to kiss his ass till they don't think he's powerful. Or is there something more than that?
I think among elected Republicans, it's mostly just a craven bid for illegitimate power. They see the state of play. The base is not going to switch allegiances as long as Donald is in the game. If Donald gets pushed out of the game unwillingly, he will destroy whoever the Republican nominee is if it's not him. So I think most of them are on the McCarthy, McConnell end of the spectrum. This is the guy. Nothing we can do about it. A lot of them would probably prefer it for him to ride off into the sunset, but that is going to be at a place and time of his own choosing, not theirs. So they'll either mildly rebuke him or say nothing. And then, as you say, vote for him if he's the nominee. And there is a smaller but still significant percentage of the party that just is all in with all of the horrible things he's done and stands for because they agree with him. They think that people like him should be able to get away with anything, including treason, with impunity, just because he's going to advance their agenda, even if his only agenda is to save his own skin. Because think about this. He's running for president of the United States so he can, one, not be convicted of treason against the country, and two, as a grift to make more money. But there are obviously lots of people who are totally up for that, no matter how hypocritical it might be. The bigger concern is that, Republicans aren't being honest about it. They are acting as if he is just amazing and nothing he's done is wrong, which sends a horrible message to the electorate. So we now have tens of millions of Americans who are pro-Russia and anti-Ukrainian democracy, who question the validity of NATO, who question the sanctity of American elections, and who think that if you're the right person, it is totally cool to endanger the lives of Americans and American allies so you can make a buck by selling nuclear secrets, allegedly. That is going to take decades to undo, whether he runs, loses, or not.
You have other relatives in this family.
Yes, I do.
Right? Some of them, Donald Jr., Eric, and so forth, they're sticking with the program. It looks like Ivanka Trump is trying to pretend that she had nothing to do with this, that, she was just passing through, trying to help the country, and has now moved on to the next thing. I just, the dynamic within this family. How is she able to get away with that and still be invited to Thanksgiving dinner?
We really do miss her moderating influence, don't we? Well, is she going to be?
By the way, I think she, in some respects, is possibly the most gifted grifter of the bunch, because she plays the same grift, but she at least has some people believing that, it's good for them. It's not bad.
Yeah, she actually reminds me of my grandfather a little bit, which is not a compliment. Although she might take it as one, who knows? I think it's very important to understand that every single relationship in my family, at least, among them, is transactional. And Eric and Donnie know that they have no choice here. Like, what are they going to do? What legitimate company would hire them, and to do what exactly? So they're stuck. Everybody here knows upon which side their bread is buttered, right? Ivanka isn't getting as much out of this as she was putting into it. And she happens to be married to to a man who's from a legitimately wealthy family.
I'm not sure I'd use the word legitimate, but I'm with you.
I mean, they're
actually wealthy, right? How they got wealthy, exactly.
Yes, they certainly didn't get the last $2 billion legitimately.
You mean the Saudi, the Saudi tip that he got for whatever it's worth?
Yes, exactly. Where's our investigation into that? Please.
Where is it? Where is it? I mean, seriously, where is it? Anyway, Merrick Garland doesn't want to appear partisan.
Yes, so let's go after Hunter Biden then.
Yeah. Well, they did. They spent 4 years going after Hunter Biden with a prosecutor who was independent, could do whatever he wanted. He found nothing. So maybe they should actually look where there's something.
It would be nice. It would also have been nice if they'd done it 2 years ago, but here we are. And listen, I don't know. I think Donald, for his own self-interested reasons, has been putting a good face on what could reasonably be seen as Ivanka's defection, because he has to, and he's also because the family's been put through hell, don't you know?
Yeah.
So
it was terrible. I felt bad for Ivanka and Jared because I think they only made like $600 million while they were in the White House or something like that. I mean, to me, 6 million, it's all the same. But I mean,
listen, at least they weren't selling paintings for a couple of bucks.
You don't know. You don't know what they were selling from in the White House.
That's true. I don't know. But it's so obviously to anybody who has pretensions, and that's what they are, to being re-embraced by polite society. The end of the road has come in terms of having anything to do with Donald, even if you're his kid. So so that's I'm pretty sure that's where Ivanka would be at the moment, and she'll be fine.
Well, there's a reckoning that may be coming. I want to talk about it. This is the point in the show where we say thanks to everybody in the general public for listening. If you're a member, stand by because we'll be continuing in just one moment. Okay, so welcome back. So here's one of the psychological quandaries that's been on my mind about this whole big story. There is a non-zero chance that your uncle is going to be convicted of a serious crime. Now, I still rate the odds that he never goes to jail or gets a jail term as higher than the odds that he does. Why? Because I think we have a two-tier justice system and, he'll find a way to weasel out of it or appeal his way out of it. But if he, for a moment, thought that he actually had to go to jail, this would blow up the entire view of the universe that you described earlier in the podcast. And my personal view is he would hightail it out of Dodge. I think, a long time ago, in a world far, far away, I had a little tiny company and we did like conferences and sort of events and that kind of thing for other companies. And we got sponsored to do one by Enron. And, we were doing on energy and it seemed like a perfectly natural thing, clean energy, gas, it seemed fairly virtuous. And then these stories started to appear saying there may be something fishy with Enron, which was the 7th largest company in the Fortune 500 at the time. And then, and they would call up and say, what should we do about this or that? And I'd say this or that. And then I finally called up and I said, well, I just saw this story and it looks pretty bad. Here's what you should do. And the guy said, actually, we did everything they said. There's no way out of this. Senior people in this company are going to go down for this. And I was like, oh, that's very sad. And it went senior enough that the CEO of the company, Ken Lay, was going to have to go to jail. And miraculously, under circumstances that I think are super dubious, he passed away shortly before he had to go to jail. And my guess is he took a pill or he did something to avoid having to go to jail. And to me, that's the closest analogy I can think of to the idea that Donald Trump is going to have to go to now. But he might go to Saudi Arabia instead of, he's a narcissist. I don't think so. What do you think would happen?
Yeah, I don't see Donald taking the easy way out. I mean, if suicide is easy, I don't know. I don't see that happening because again, I think it's very hard for him to process that it's the end of the road. And two, he's a coward. And it does take a certain amount of energy and guts, if you will, to kill yourself under any circumstances. I would think that just doesn't seem like the road he'd go down. I do think, though, that getting out of Dodge is definitely something he would consider, assuming he can. He has Secret Service. I don't really know how these things work. I don't think it would be easy, but I see that's more likely than his standing and fighting. I mean, if he had the courage of his convictions, he never would have left the White House, right? But he scampered out with all of his boxes of classified materials.
And by the way, classified materials and golf shirts.
Well, they go well together after Memorial Day.
Yeah, no, well, that's true. See, that's why we turn to you, because you really understand this mindset better than I do.
And I just want to say, first of all, I also agree with you that it's almost the idea of his going to prison seems extraordinarily unlikely. I don't think this country has the nerves of steel it would need to do that. He should go to prison forever. I don't think he'll see a day in a jail cell, which is a shame. And I don't think it sends the right message. But what could maybe give us some comfort is that if he is pushed to the point of having to leave the country, I think that would be the last nail in the Republican Party's coffin, which would be great.
Well, see, now you're just be a cockeyed optimist here.
How dare
you're just
well, he'll do incalculable damage to everybody as well. So
that's going to happen, right? I mean, here's the reality. Yeah. I agree with you. I think the odds that he goes to prison are very low. I think the odds that he's actually convicted of a crime are actually pretty high. I'm not sure which of these, but so one of these it's going to happen. Eileen Cannon will go, yes, you stole nuclear secrets, but I sentence you to 5 days by the pool at Mar-a-Lago. But
no golf,
no golf, exactly. But having said that, at a certain point, it's like the Durham hearings that took place yesterday. At a certain point, the truth comes out. So at a certain point, Ted Lieu or Adam Schiff or Eric Swalwell says, so, Mr. Durham, did you read the Mueller report? Did you believe that the charges of obstruction were there? Did you believe in what they said he had done with the Russians? And Durham's under oath, and he goes, yes. And all of a sudden, you realize the whole Durham thing is a complete sham, right? But there's this moment of reckoning coming for the Republican Party. And I just don't understand how, is it that Kevin McCarthy and Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert and MTG and Hawley and Cruz and DeSantis and all these other people are so stupid that they don't realize that what they've been doing is backing the most corrupt, fraudulent president in U.S. history? I mean, who's also, betrayed the country scores of times. But at a certain point, though, doesn't there have to be a reckoning there?
Well, I think narcissism makes you stupid. If you're narcissistic enough,
that explains it. I should have told my teachers that back in school.
Yeah, because it's a shortcut to explain part of what's going on, at least. And they're all extraordinarily arrogant people. They also, again, partially, they want somebody like Donald, maybe not Donald, but somebody like him in power. And let's face it, I think we can see this in the incredibly long line of people who've been loyal to Donald and whom he has then discarded. There's always 10 people to take that person's place. They never think it's going to happen to them. If they toe the line, if they carry his water or whatever, Cruz or Hawley or McCarthy, he'll be the one person that Donald is loyal to in return, even though it's never happened in the history of the planet before. So I don't think I think that impunity for Republicans is just the rule of law here. And it doesn't occur to them because they don't think there will be the opportunity. That's why it's so important to them that they gerrymander states so heavily. That's why they don't want votes counted, or they don't want people voting at all. That's why they want to keep the American people ignorant and stupid and burning books, because they have no interest in winning anymore. They just want to hang on to power. And they're rigging the system, and they're continuing to rig the system. And that's why it's so dangerous to allow these things to go on for so long. I mean, David, I'm sure this probably keeps you up night sometimes too. The fact that we have active seditionists currently serving in our government. How is that allowed to happen? And even if we ever got to the point of holding them accountable, which I highly doubt at this point, it's too late, because the second big lie has already taken root with so many Americans that I don't think you can unring that bell.
No, it's a good point, and it does keep me up at night. Let me ask you one last question. We just have a couple of minutes left. But it's one that I think of when I'm talking to you about this. And, people who listen to your podcasts or read your books know that you have great insights into a much broader set of things than your family. And nobody should be consigned to sort of the boundaries of their own family in any event.
I concur.
But having said that, and despite the fact that, you have become one of the really most important voices of clarity about this whole era, do you have a perspective on Donald Trump, on the family of Donald Trump, that at some point is, you're related, his father's your grandfather, your father's his brother. Do you ever have any moments of empathy? Do you ever have any moments where you're like, oh yeah, I knew that guy back when, and it's turned into surely you have contempt and horror and disgust and all those other things, but people are 360-degree creatures, and I'm just wondering if, as you look at it, you ever think of it in the human terms of, oh yeah, I knew this guy 30 years ago, and how horribly his parents must have fucked him up, or whatever it is. I just wonder.
No, I have no empathy for him. I did, it's funny, when I was a long time when I didn't think about him at all, and then he ran for president, and I kind of didn't have a choice. And then worse happened after that. While I was writing the book, I had to think about things I hadn't thought about in decades, and I had to look at things from a perspective I didn't have growing up. Because 1, I was a kid, and 2, I wasn't a psychologist yet. So I didn't have the tools to understand. I have enormous amounts of empathy for those children. The simplest way to describe my dad's family is that my grandparents had 5 children. Every single one of them is a destroyed human being. That's a pretty good track record, as a parent. All 5 of them. I have enormous compassion for what those children were put through, what they suffered at the hands of their parents, the circumstances they grew up with, and again, in the context of great privilege as well. But for this adult human being who has ended or destroyed the lives of over 1 million people, who has divided this country more than it's ever been since the Civil War, who has used his privilege to steal from the American people, who has committed treason against this country, who has potentially, we don't know how this story ends, David. We don't know if American democracy survives this era. I have no compassion, no empathy, because he has none. And this is somebody who, yes, had a terrible childhood, but you know what? I know people who had worse childhoods who ended up being decent, kind, generous people. He has no excuse. And the fact that people continue to empower him to continue to harm this country is kind of unspeakable. And the one thing that I've always just found fascinating is that, with the exception of my dad, they're all horrible. There's not one person in that family who's risen above it and done anything good for anybody outside themselves. It's just quite an extraordinary achievement, I have to say.
Yeah. And they turned on your dad for being a decent guy, it seems to me, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
But so here I have an idea. You may have wondered why I invited you to this meeting today, but I have an idea listening to you, which is just now, that when you're done with your romance novel, you need to write a Gothic horror story. And the Gothic horror story is going to be set in a kind of cheesy house in Queens, where there are these two strange parents who own a few pieces of real estate, and the mother drives around in a Rolls Royce collecting quarters from laundry machines and so forth.
You've really thought this through.
No, I've just read your book and some other books. And they have a dysfunctional family, on a street in Queens that nobody knows is important. And they fuck up all their kids, which most people get to do in peace. And then those kids disappear and they have no consequence for anybody. But in this particular case, one of the kids goes off and 1 million people die later of COVID. And the democracy of the United States is knocked to its knees, possibly on the ropes. Nazis rise up across it. And it's all because, at the end of the day, these two people in Queens were so weird. I mean, you know what I mean?
Oh, man. I wish that were Gothic horror fiction instead of true crime.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's true. Well, maybe, true crime horror. You frame it however you want to. To me, the interesting story that I haven't seen, the story you could tell, but I haven't seen, is the story of what's going on in that house. Yeah. Because most people, what goes on in most houses ends in that house, and it doesn't bring down a whole society.
Thank goodness. Could you imagine if they did? But, and that's another fascinating aspect of all this, that, as you say, it's not like this was the only dysfunctional family in which horrible things happened. It's just
probably on that block, it was not the only one.
Probably, exactly. Especially because it was this really upper middle class neighborhood. So who knows what was going on? But the thing is, it's, if you ask people about their child, if people have asked me, did you think it was weird? I'm no, how would I know it was weird? What are you comparing it to? It's such a closed system. And that's what makes it so dangerous, because there's no reality testing, especially if you continue to be protected the way Donald was. So he never had to bang up against those limits, because he continued to surround himself with the same myths and stuff and the same behaviors. And that's kind of the fascinating, really creepy part of it, is because he kept being allowed to. And he still is after all of this. So I think that's next on my list.
I will read it. I will buy extra copies. I will give it to my friends. Anyway, Mary, it's good to see you. Thank you for coming back. Hope you will come back again soon. I'm sure everybody out there enjoyed listening to it. Where can they find your Substack? Does it have an address or?
The Substack is BackstorySerial, SERIAL.com. And the novel is called The Italian Lesson. So you can go there and check it out, and hopefully you like it. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on over there. And, we're having fun with it. It's a nice way to take a break from everything else.
Well, I encourage everybody to do it, and we'll get you back here again soon. For now, thanks, Mary. Thanks to everybody for listening. And tune in, as every single day we've got something new for you here at the DSR Network. Until then, bye-bye.